The hallway was silent. Too silent. Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, stood outside the drawing room at Buckingham Palace, her hand frozen on the cold brass door handle. Inside, she could hear voices, sharp, dismissive, and one of them belonged to Queen Camilla. Sophie had been summoned for what was supposed to be a casual afternoon tea. But the tone and the message she received that morning felt different, colder, more formal. And now, standing here, she understood why. Through the gap in the door, she heard Camilla's voice clearly. Diana was a disaster waiting to happen. All that emotion, all that drama, the family is better off without that kind of weakness. Sophie's breath caught in her throat. Then came another voice. Camilla again? And Kate? She's no better. Playing the perfect princess, while barely holding it together. If she had any real strength, she wouldn't need so much coddling. Sophie's hand tightened on the handle. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. She had heard rumors before. Whispers in corridors. Snide remarks hidden behind painted smiles. But this was different. This was cruel. And it was about two women Sophie deeply respected. Diana, who had shown her kindness when she was new to royal life. Kate, who had become a true friend in recent years. Sophie pushed the door open. The room fell silent. Camilla sat in a high-backed chair near the window, teacup poised in midair. Two senior aides stood nearby, their faces stiff and unreadable. A palace guard stood motionless by the far wall, eyes forward. But Sophie saw his jaw tighten. Camilla's eyes flicked toward her. A slow, controlled smile spread across her face. How lovely. We were just talking about you. Sophie didn't smile back. No, she said quietly. You were talking about Diana and Kate? The room seemed to hold its breath. Camilla set her teacup down with a soft clink. Her smile remained, but her eyes turned cold. You must have misheard, darling. I didn't. Sophie stepped further into the room. Her voice was calm, but her hands trembled slightly at her sides. She had never done anything like this before. She had always been the quiet one, the dependable one, the one who stayed out of trouble. But not today. If you love real stories like this, hit that subscribe button now. You won't want to miss what happens next. I heard exactly what you said, Sophie continued, and I won't stand here and let you speak about them that way. One of the aides shifted uncomfortably. The guard's eyes darted briefly towards Sophie, then back to the wall. Camilla's smile faded. Careful, Sophie, she said softly. You're speaking to your queen. Sophie's heart hammered, but she didn't back down. Then maybe the queen should speak with more grace. The words hung in the air like smoke. Camilla's face turned to stone, and Sophie knew there was no going back now. Asterisk for a long moment. No one moved. Camilla sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. But Sophie could see the flicker of shock behind her eyes. No one spoke to her like that. Not anymore. Sophie's pulse roared in her ears, but she kept her gaze steady. Diana gave everything to this family, Sophie said, her voice stronger now. She gave her heart, her time, her life. And she was destroyed for it. Not by the public. By people in this palace. Camilla's lips pressed into a thin line. You don't know what you're talking about. I know enough. Sophie took another step forward. The guard by the wall shifted slightly, his hand moving toward his side. Not threatening, just alert. Sophie caught his eye for a fraction of a second. He looked ... conflicted. And Kate, Sophie continued, has done nothing but serve this family with dignity. She's raised her children under a microscope. She smiled through every cruel headline. And she's never once complained. Not publicly. Not even privately, to most of us. One of the aides cleared her throat softly. Camilla's eyes flicked toward her, sharp as a knife. That will be all, Camilla said coldly. The aide hesitated, said, That will be all. Both aides left quickly, their footsteps echoing down the hall. The heavy door closed behind them with a soft thud. Now it was just Sophie, Camilla, and the guard. Camilla stood slowly. She was taller than Sophie, and she used every inch of it. She moved towards Sophie with the grace of someone who had spent decades learning how to command a room. You think you're defending them, Camilla said quietly. But you're making a mistake. Sophie didn't move. The only mistake, Sophie said, is thinking I would stay silent. Camilla's eyes narrowed. You've always been so compliant, Sophie. So easy. I didn't think you had this in you. Maybe you don't know me as well as you think. Camilla circled her slowly, like a cat studying a mouse. Do you know what happens to people who make scenes? Camilla asked softly. Who forget their place. Sophie's stomach twisted, but she kept her voice calm. Is that a threat? Camilla smiled. A cold, sharp smile. It's a reminder. Sophie felt a chill run down her spine, but she didn't break eye contact. I'm not afraid of you. Should be. The words were soft, almost kind, but they carried weight. Camilla stopped in front of her, close enough that Sophie could smell her perfume, heavy, floral, suffocating. Now Diana thought she could stand up to this family too, Camilla said quietly. Look where that got her. Sophie's blood turned to ice. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Don't, Sophie whispered. Don't you dare use her death to threaten me. Camilla's smile widened, and in that moment, Sophie realized this wasn't just about Diana or Kate. This was about power, and Camilla would do anything to keep it. Asterisk, the guard by the wall, coughed softly. It was barely a sound, but it broke the tension like a crack in glass. Camilla's eyes flicked toward him, sharp and cold. He straightened immediately, his face blank again. But Sophie had seen the discomfort in his posture. The way his jaw had tightened when Camilla mentioned Diana. He had heard everything, and he didn't like it. Camilla turned back to Sophie. Her smile gone now. You're dismissed, she said flatly. No. The word came out before Sophie could stop it. Camilla's eyebrows lifted slightly. For the first time, she looked genuinely surprised. Excuse me? Sophie's heart was pounding so hard she thought she might faint. But she forced herself to stay grounded, to remember why she was here. I'm not leaving, Sophie said. Not until you hear me. Camilla's face hardened. I don't have to hear anything from you, as Sophie said quietly. You do. She took a breath. Her hands were still shaking, but her voice was steady now. Diana was loved, Sophie said, by millions of people, by her sons, by everyone who ever met her, and you hated her for it. Camilla's eyes flashed. Never, yes, you did. Sophie's voice was soft, but it cut through the room like a blade. You hated that she had what you wanted. The title, the attention, the love. And when she was gone, you thought you could erase her. Rewrite the story. Make people forget. Camilla said nothing, but her hands were trembling now too. But they didn't forget, Sophie continued, and they never will. Because she was real. She was human, and people loved her for it. Camilla's lips parted, but no words came out. Sophie stepped closer. And now you're doing the same thing to Kate, she said. You see her strength, her grace, and it threatens you. Because she reminds people of Diana, and you can't stand it. That's enough. Camilla's voice was low, dangerous. But Sophie didn't stop. Kate has given everything to this family, Sophie said. She's endured things that would have broken most people. And she's done it with dignity, with kindness. She's raised 3 beautiful children. She supported William through everything. And she's never once asked for recognition. Sophie's voice wavered slightly, but she pushed through. And you repay her with cruelty. With whispers and coldness and disrespect. Camilla's face was pale now. Her hands gripped the edge of the chair behind her. You don't understand, Camilla said quietly. You don't know what it's like. To always be second. To always be compared. For a moment, Sophie saw something flicker in Camilla's eyes. Something almost human, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. That's not an excuse, Sophie said softly. And you know it. Camilla's face hardened again. Get out. Sophie didn't move. I said get out. The guard shifted again. His hand moved slightly, as if preparing to step forward, but he didn't. He stayed where he was, watching Sophie turn to leave. But then she stopped. She looked back at Camilla, standing there in her perfectly tailored suit, Her crown, invisible, but ever-present. They deserve better than this, Sophie said quietly. Diana did. Kate does. And so does this family. And with that, she walked out. The door closed softly behind her, and the hallway was silent once more. Sophie didn't stop walking until she reached the far end of the corridor. Her legs felt weak. Her hands were still trembling. She leaned against the cold stone wall and closed her eyes, trying to catch her breath. What had she just done? She had confronted the queen, spoken words that could never be taken back, crossed a line that most people in the palace wouldn't dare approach. And yet, she didn't regret it. Behind her, she heard footsteps. She turned quickly, her heart leaping into her throat. It was the guard. He had followed her. He stopped a few feet away, his face still neutral, but his eyes were different, softer. Your Royal Highness, he said quietly. Sophie straightened, trying to compose herself. Yes. He glanced back down the hallway, as if checking to make sure they were alone. Then he stepped closer. I just wanted to say... He hesitated. What you did in there? That took courage. Sophie blinked, surprised. I shouldn't have. Yes, he interrupted gently. You should have... He looked at her directly now, and she saw something in his expression she hadn't expected. Respect. We all heard the stories about Princess Diana, he said quietly. About how she was treated. And we see how things are now. With the Princess of Wales. He paused. It's not right. Sophie felt a lump form in her throat. But no one says anything, she whispered, because no one dares. He gave her a small, sad smile, until today. Sophie didn't know what to say. The guard straightened, his professional mask sliding back into place. I need to return to my post, he said. But, thank you. For saying what needed to be said, he turned and walked back down the corridor, his footsteps echoing softly. Sophie stood there for a long moment, her mind spinning. She wasn't alone. Maybe she never had been. Later that evening, Sophie sat in her private sitting room. Staring at her phone, she had 3 missed calls from Edward, her husband. 2 from Anne, the Princess Royal, and a text message from William. She opened William's message first. I heard what happened. Thank you. Her eyes stung with tears. She typed back quickly. I hope I didn't make things worse. Response came almost immediately. You didn't. You made them better. Sophie set her phone down and buried her face in her hands. She had expected anger, consequences, maybe even exile from certain royal circles, but not this. Not gratitude. A soft knock came at the door. Come in. Sophie called. The door opened, and Catherine, Princess of Wales, stepped inside. She was wearing a simple sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked tired, but her eyes were bright. Sophie stood immediately. Kate crossed the room and pulled her into a tight hug. Sophie froze for a moment, then hugged her back, her tears finally spilling over. I heard Kate whispered, everything. I'm so sorry, Sophie said, her voice breaking. I didn't mean to cause trouble. I just couldn't. Don't apologize, Kate said firmly. She pulled back and looked Sophie in the eyes. Don't you dare apologize. Her own eyes were wet now, too. No one has ever stood up for me like that, Kate said softly. Not in that way. Not to her. Sophie wiped her eyes. You deserve so much better, Kate smiled. Sad but genuine. So did Diana. They stood there for a moment. 2 women carrying the weight of a world that demanded perfection and gave nothing in return. What happens now? Sophie asked quietly. Kate took a breath. Now, she said, we keep going, like we always do. But something in her voice had changed. Something had shifted, and they both knew it. Asterisk the next morning. Sophie woke to a message from the palace. She was being summoned to a private meeting with King Charles. Her stomach dropped. This was it. The consequences she had been expecting. Edward sat beside her at the breakfast table, his hand resting on hers. Whatever happens, he said quietly, I'm with you. Sophie nodded, though her throat felt tight. She dressed carefully, choosing a simple navy dress and pearls. Nothing too bold, nothing that could be misinterpreted. The drive to the palace felt longer than usual. When she arrived, she was led not to the main offices, but to a smaller, private study. The kind of room where difficult conversations happened away from prying eyes. King Charles was already there, standing by the window, his hands clasped behind his back. He turned when she entered. "Sophie," he said quietly. "Sit, please." She sat, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her heart pounding. Charles sat across from her. For a long moment, he said nothing. He simply looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "I heard about yesterday," he said finally. Sophie swallowed. "I apologize if I overstepped, Your Majesty. He raised a hand, stopping her. "Not here to reprimand you." Sophie blinked, confused. Charles leaned back in his chair, his expression weary. "Do you know what the hardest part of this job is?" he asked quietly. Sophie shook her head. "It's knowing that sometimes the institution is wrong, and being powerless to change it." He looked at her directly. "My mother spent 70 years holding this family together, and she did it brilliantly. But she made choices. Choices that hurt people I loved." Sophie's breath caught. "Diana," Charles said softly, "was one of those people." His eyes were distant now, lost in memory. "I failed her," he said, "in so many ways, and I've had to live with that every day since." Sophie felt tears prick her eyes again. "I don't want to fail, Catherine," Charles said, his voice firm now. "Or William. Or my grandchildren." He looked at Sophie. "What you did yesterday, ... It wasn't easy, and it wasn't safe, but it was right." Sophie didn't know what to say. "Camilla is my wife," Charles continued, "and I love her. But she carries her own wounds, her own insecurities, and sometimes those wounds make her cruel." He stood and walked back to the window. "I've spoken with her," he said. "She won't admit it, but your words affected her. Maybe more than you know." Sophie stood as well. "I didn't mean to cause division," she said quietly. Charles turned to her, and for the first time, he smiled. "You didn't cause division, Sophie. You exposed it, and sometimes that's the only way healing can begin." He crossed the room and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Thank you," he said simply, "for having the courage I didn't." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "What happens now?" she asked. Charles sighed. "Now, we move forward carefully, but forward." He walked her to the door, and Sophie, she turned. "Diana would be proud of you." The words hit her like a wave. She nodded, unable to speak, and left the room. As she walked down the corridor, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope, *. 3 weeks later, something changed. It was subtle. The kind of thing most people wouldn't notice. But those inside the palace felt it. Camilla began attending more events with Catherine. Not many, but enough. At a charity gala, they were photographed together, standing side by side. Camilla's smile was polite, measured. But Catherine's was genuine. And when a reporter asked Catherine about the Queen, she didn't hesitate. "The Queen has been a tremendous support," Catherine said gracefully. "We're grateful for her guidance." It was diplomatic, careful, but it was also kind. Behind the scenes, things were shifting. To Sophie, received a handwritten note from Camilla. It was short, formal, but it was there. "Thank you for your honesty." It was not easy to hear, but perhaps it was necessary. Sophie read it 3 times, unsure how to feel. Was it an apology? An acknowledgement? Or simply a truce? Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe it was enough. Months later, Sophie stood in the gardens at Kensington Palace. Catherine had invited her for tea. A real one this time. No tension. No hidden agendas. They sat under the shade of an old oak tree, watching Catherine's children play in the distance. "They grow so fast," Catherine said softly. Sophie smiled. "They do." Catherine turned to her. "I never thanked you properly," she said. "For what you did?" Sophie shook her head. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Catherine's eyes were serious now. You stood up for me when I couldn't stand up for myself. You risked everything, and you didn't have to. Sophie reached out and took her hand. Yes, I did, she said simply, because it was right. Catherine squeezed her hand. Diana would have loved you, she said quietly. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. I hope so. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the children laugh and play, the sunlight filtering through the leaves above them. Somewhere in the palace, life continued. The institution carried on. The crown remained, but something had changed. A voice had been raised. A truth had been spoken. And for two women who had spent their lives in the shadow of expectation, it was enough. The story of what happened that day in the palace spread quietly. Not in headlines or press releases, but in whispered conversations between staff members, in knowing glances between those who had been there. The guard who had followed Sophie that day later told his wife about it. She told a friend, and slowly the story traveled. It became a reminder that even in a world of protocol and power, sometimes one person's courage is enough to change everything. Sophie never sought recognition for what she did. She didn't need it. She had done it for Diana, for Catherine, for every woman who had ever been silenced by the weight of the crown. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The palace stood as it always had, grand, imposing, eternal. But inside its walls, something had shifted. A crack had appeared in the perfect facade, and through that crack, little light had begun to shine.